By the 47th missed call, I still refused to answer. I assumed my parents were just calling from Santorini to brag about a lavish wedding they could never afford. Sitting alone in my dark Seattle apartment, I had no idea my forged signature was already on unseen contracts, or that my family was preparing to make me their financial scapegoat. But they forgot one crucial detail. The obedient, silent daughter they exploited for years no longer exists. My name is Amy Chapman. I am 35 years old, and my entire professional existence is built upon the meticulous anticipation of disaster. Living alone in Seattle, suspended high above the damp, glittering streets in an obsessively organized apartment, I have spent the better part of a decade cultivating a fortress of quiet predictability. The silence in my living room tonight is absolute, heavy, and deliberately maintained. It is broken only by the steady, rhythmic drumming of an autumn rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows and the faint, constant hum of my laptop cooling fan. It is nearly midnight, yet I am fully awake, bathed in the harsh blue light of dual monitors, completely engrossed in a labyrinth of spreadsheets and compliance audits. As the director of supplier risk control at the logistics firm Grayland Port Systems, my days and nights are dedicated to identifying hidden vulnerabilities. I hunt for the weak links in international supply chains, the undisclosed liabilities, the multi-million-dollar contracts built on nothing but empty promises. I am paid a very high salary to look at a structurally unsound arrangement and predict exactly when, where, and how spectacularly it will collapse. Ironically, the most volatile, high-risk liability I have ever had to manage has never been a corporate vendor. It has always been my own family. The sudden, violent buzzing of my phone against the solid oak surface of my desk shatters the stillness of the room like a physical blow. It does not vibrate just once or twice. It buzzes in a relentless, frantic rhythm, demanding immediate, unquestioning attention. I do not flinch. I do not rush to pick it up. I merely shift my gaze from the orderly rows of data on my screen to the harsh, glaring white light of the mobile display. The name flashing aggressively across the glass is my mother, Pamela Chapman. The notifications are stacking up, one after another, creating a rapid cascade of digital panic. I reach out, my fingers cool and remarkably steady, and swipe to open the message thread. The text is a solid wall of breathless, erratic sentences. She is demanding an immediate wire transfer of $7,200. The funds, she claims, are urgently required right this second to release the vendor hold for the fireworks display and the string quartet. There is no greeting. There is no polite inquiry about my health or how my week in Seattle is going. There is only the familiar, suffocating cocktail of sheer desperation and deeply ingrained entitlement. Her tone leaps off the screen, a masterful, manipulative blend of frantic begging and the rock-solid assumption that I will, as I always have, simply open my wallet and make the problem vanish. She writes as though my personal checking account is an infinite, unconditional emergency fund, a bottomless, well-maintained exclusively for the convenience of the Chapman family. Half a world away, bathed in the brilliant, unforgiving Aegean light, my younger sister, Sloane Chapman, is currently orchestrating what is nominally supposed to be her wedding in Santorini. However, calling it a wedding feels like a gross misrepresentation of the truth. It is not a celebration of love, nor is it a private joining of two families. It is a highly produced, heavily curated status positioning event. It is a theatrical performance designed explicitly for social media consumption, aimed at convincing a very specific, wealthy echelon of society that the Chapmans inherently belong among them. Every cascading floral arrangement, every sweeping drone camera angle, every custom monogrammed linen napkin has been selected not for beauty or joy, but for maximum leverage and visual clout. I lean back in my ergonomic leather chair, rubbing the tight bridge of my nose, and let the memories of the past few months wash over me. I remember the exact conversation, taking place on a Tuesday evening over 6 months ago, when they first presented me with their grand, delusional vision for this destination spectacle. I had looked at the proposed budget spreadsheet, a document so bloated and entirely untethered from our financial reality that it made my professional risk-assessing mind reel. I had drawn a hard, unforgiving line right then and there. I told them, with absolute, unwavering clarity, that I would not be funding this delusion. I explicitly stated that I would not cover a single dollar of their inevitable budget overages, nor would I serve as a safety net when the expenses spiraled out of control. I had warned them that they were building a massive glass castle on a foundation of sand. They had smiled, nodded, called me a pessimist, and proceeded to ignore every single word I said. They operated under the deeply ingrained belief that my boundaries were merely suggestions, assuming that when the catastrophic bills finally came due, the responsible, boring, financially stable older sister would swoop in to save them from public humiliation. Reading my mother's increasingly frantic demands for the $7,200, I wait for the familiar rush of anxiety to hit my chest. I wait for the sickening guilt, the elevated heart rate, the crushing weight of familial obligation that has defined almost my entire adult life. But as the seconds tick by in my quiet, rain-slicked apartment, I realize with startling clarity that none of those things are coming. Instead, a profound, icy calmness settles over me, chilling my blood in the most liberating way possible. It is the exact same sensation I experience at work when I finally uncover the fatal, undeniable flaw in a corrupt supplier's financial statement, when a toxic asset finally drops its disguise and reveals its true, decaying nature. There is no anger left in me. There is only cold, clinical clarity. I am watching a catastrophic failure unfold in real time, but for the very first time in my 35 years of existence, I completely refuse to step into the blast radius to shield them from the shrapnel. The messages continue to pour in, vibrating the phone across the desk inch by inch. My mother frantically types that the local event coordinator is threatening to pull the plug entirely, that Sloan is having a full-blown panic attack in her bridal suite, that the wealthy guests from the groom's side will immediately notice the humiliating absence of the string quartet. She uses heavy, loaded words like ruin, disaster, and emergency. But an emergency is an unpredictable, unforeseen crisis. What is happening on that Greek island right now is not an emergency. It is the guaranteed, mathematically certain outcome of a highly flawed equation. They spent money they absolutely did not possess to impress people they do not even genuinely like, and now the brittle illusion is fracturing before their eyes. I look at the digital keyboard glowing on my phone screen. I do not draft a lengthy defensive response outlining my previous warnings. I do not justify my position or explain my finances. I do not offer a pathetic compromise, nor do I offer a fraction of the requested amount just to smooth things over and buy them time. I do not apologize for letting my sister down on her supposed special day. I press 2 letters. No, I hit send. It is just one word. There is no punctuation attached. There is no explanation provided. There is absolutely no room for bargaining. I watch the tiny gray indicator light up, confirming the single word has been delivered across the Atlantic Ocean, straight into the heart of their self-made chaos. I feel a momentary, hollow sense of victory. I engage the silent mode on the device, stripping it of its ability to demand my attention, silencing the ensuing storm of digital outrage I know is currently crossing the network. With a deliberate, highly controlled motion, I place the phone face down on the polished wood of my desk, hiding the screen. I turn my attention back to the glowing spreadsheets on my large monitors, fully intending to resume my complex analysis of shipping lane delays and vendor compliance metrics. I try to immerse myself back into the safe, logical, rules-based world of Grayland Port Systems, but the silence in my apartment now feels distinctly different. It is no longer a comforting, protective blanket. It is a heavy, pressurized void, like the atmosphere right before a massive pressure drop. I stare at the endless rows of data, but the numbers blur together, refusing to make sense. A subtle, creeping tension begins to take root in the back of my neck, tightening my muscles. I know my family too well. I know the sheer, desperate velocity of their social ambition and the lengths they will go to protect their fabricated image. A single two-letter word from me will not be enough to halt a machine that has been built and primed over decades to exploit my financial stability. The refusal is out there, hanging heavily in the digital ether, but deep down, beneath the cold logic, I possess a fleeting, terrifying realization. As the Seattle rain continues to lash violently against my window pane, I know with absolute, unshakable certainty that this night will not end with the simple, peaceful silence I so desperately desire. To truly grasp the mechanics of the impending disaster playing out across the Aegean Sea, you have to understand the fundamental accounting principles of the Chapman family. In their eyes, I was never the beloved firstborn child. I was a sovereign wealth fund. For over a decade, my relationship with my parents and my sister has functioned on a strictly unilateral economic model. They engage in reckless deficit spending to fund their lifestyle, and I am expected to silently subsidize the inevitable fallout. My phone does not ring on a random Tuesday evening because my mother wants to know if I am eating well, or if my back still aches from hunching over compliance reports for 60 hours a week. They do not call to celebrate my promotions or ask about my day. My phone only lights up when a financial shell game is on the verge of total collapse. They only reach out when they desperately need to float a check, secure a temporary advance, or, in their absolute favorite terminology, save face in front of their peers. Take my father, Derek Chapman. 5 years ago, he decided that a man of his supposed community standing could no longer be seen driving a sensible domestic sedan. He walked into a luxury dealership and signed a predatory lease on a vintage European sports car. Agreeing to a 12% interest rate and a balloon payment he had absolutely no mathematical hope of clearing. When the reality of his finances caught up with his ego, and the repo agents were literally circling his manicured suburban driveway, he did not turn to his golf buddies for help. He called me, his voice cracking with manufactured shame. I had to liquidate a mutual fund I had been painstakingly building since I was 22 years old, to cover the $28,000 balance and keep his humiliating secret buried. He thanked me by clapping me on the shoulder and telling me I was always so remarkably solid. Solid. That is the exact adjective they have weaponized against me for years. In the Chapman lexicon, being solid does not equate to being successful, driven, or worthy of parental pride. Solid translates to stationary. It means I am a highly predictable, unmoving foundation that they can comfortably chip away at whenever they require raw capital for their delusions of grandeur. My mother, Pamela, operated her secret retail credit cards under the exact same principle. I spent the latter half of my 20s quietly neutralizing her hidden balances. $8,000 at a high-end department store here, $5,000 for a poorly planned luxury cruise there, simply to prevent her cascading debt from destroying the mortgage rate on a house they should have sold a decade ago. And then, inevitably, there is Sloane. 3 years ago, my younger sister decided she was destined to be a beauty industry disruptor. She launched a skincare brand aggressively marketed as clean, vegan, and ethically sourced. In reality, it was little more than an exercise in buying aesthetically pleasing frosted glass bottles and posting inspirational quotes online. When the actual business mechanics failed and a manufacturer in New Jersey threatened to sue her for $45,000 in unpaid warehouse inventory, Sloane spent 4 days sobbing uncontrollably in her childhood bedroom. She told our parents her life was entirely ruined. So, as always, I stepped into the breach. I spent hours on the phone with aggressive supply chain managers, negotiating the debt down to $22,000, and wired the funds directly from my emergency savings. I kept her out of corporate litigation. I kept her polished name completely off the public court dockets. Sloane posted a serene, golden hour photograph on her social media the very next morning about the beautiful, challenging lessons of female entrepreneurship, conveniently omitting the fact that her boring, corporate sister had just bailed out her sinking vanity project. While I was busy putting out their fires, my own life became a rigorous masterclass in deferred gratification. I skipped the European backpacking trips my colleagues took. I politely declined invitations to destination bachelorette parties, skipped expensive group dinners, and drove a 10-year-old vehicle with a rattling exhaust system. I funneled every spare dollar I earned into high-yield savings accounts and diversified portfolios. I built a financial fortress around myself because I knew, with chilling certainty, that I was the only actual adult in the room. If I slipped, if I fell sick or lost my job, there was absolutely no one standing beneath me with a safety net. But the bitter, twisted irony of my sacrifice is that the stronger I made my fortress, the more lavishly they believed they could live outside its walls. My fierce financial discipline did not inspire them to be more responsible. It merely acted as a limitless subsidy for their irresponsibility. They looked at my stability and saw an infinite, pre-approved line of credit. This brings us directly to the current catastrophic situation in Greece. The Santorini wedding was never an authentic celebration of romance. It was the crowning achievement of the Chapman family's lifelong, exhausting obsession with performing a level of wealth they do not actually possess. It is the ultimate vanity project, a sprawling theatrical production designed solely for the consumption of strangers on the internet. They booked cliffside villas with infinity pools, chartered antique wooden boats for the bridal brunch, and hired an exclusive media team to document an opulent lifestyle that is entirely fabricated. And the only reason my parents and my sister possessed the sheer, unadulterated audacity to sign those international contracts in the first place was because of my existence. They built this spectacular, towering monument to their own fragile egos on the bedrock assumption that when the exorbitant bills finally exceeded their meager reality, Amy would simply sigh, open her laptop, and write a check to make the bad things go away. Sitting here in the suffocating quiet of my apartment, the complex mathematics of my entire familial existence finally balance out, and the final sum is utterly devastating. I have spent 35 years of my life trying to earn my family's love by being relentlessly useful. I operated under the tragic delusion that if I solved enough of their problems, if I absorbed enough of their self-inflicted stress, they would eventually look at me and see a daughter and a sister worth cherishing simply for existing. But they do not love me. They never have. They love my utility. They love the friction I can magically remove from their daily lives. I am not a human being to them. I am an insurance policy that happens to breathe. That agonizing realization is exactly what makes tonight so fundamentally different. My blunt refusal to send the $7,200 was not a momentary lapse in my usual, obedient programming. It was not born out of petty sibling rivalry or a sudden, uncontrollable flash of anger. It was a highly calculated, permanent closure of an emotional and financial account that has been aggressively overdrawn for far too many years. I have spent my entire adult life performing risk assessment and mitigating disasters for everyone else. Tonight, the only liability I am permanently eliminating is my family's unchecked access to my future. I jolted awake in the pitch black of my bedroom at almost 3 a.m. My phone, which I had eventually moved from my office desk to my nightstand, was vibrating so violently it was inching its way toward the edge of the wood, threatening to drop onto the hardwood floor. I had managed perhaps 2 hours of shallow, restless sleep. The glowing screen cut through the darkness like a warning flare. The lock screen was a chaotic, overlapping cascade of notifications. There were 68 missed calls, dozens of text messages, a full inbox of voicemails from my mother, my father, and Sloane. The tone of the messages had undergone a radical, terrifying shift since my single-word reply a few hours prior. The polished, manipulative begging for a few $1,000s was completely gone. In its place was raw, unfiltered hysteria. I scrolled through the glowing blocks of text, my eyes adjusting to the harsh light. Call back right now. There are police here. They took our passports. If you do not help us right this second, everything is over. I sat up, pushing the heavy duvet off my legs. The cold Seattle air hit my skin, completely sobering my mind. The word police changes the fundamental nature of any situation. A vendor dispute is a civil matter. Confiscated passports and law enforcement elevate it to a criminal one. I did not bother listening to the voicemails. I pressed the call button next to my father's name. He answered before the first ring even finished connecting. The sheer volume of the chaos on the other end of the line was physically jarring. It sounded like the audio feed from a riot. I could hear a woman sobbing hysterically. Sloane, without a doubt. Beneath her wailing, there were angry voices shouting in rapid, aggressive Greek. Heavy doors slammed in the background, followed by the sharp, unmistakable sound of glass shattering against a stone floor. "Amy?" my father gasped. His voice was entirely unrecognizable. Derek Chapman was a man who spent his life projecting casual authority, the kind of guy who commanded golf courses and country club dining rooms. Right now, he sounded like a cornered, terrified animal. His breathing was ragged, catching in his throat. "Amy, thank God. You have to help us. It all blew up. It is a total disaster." "Breathe," I commanded, my voice flat and authoritative. "Tell me exactly what is happening." "The reception," he stammered, coughing nervously. "They locked it down. We were supposed to move the guests from the terrace to the main dining hall, but the vendors blocked the doors. The security guards are standing in front of the tables. They told the guests to leave. They did it right in front of everyone." Before he could finish his sentence, there was a scuffle on the line, and my mother snatched the phone away from him. "Amy, listen to me very carefully," Pamela hissed. Her voice was trembling, but there was a frantic, terrifying edge of calculation to it. "We do not have time for a lecture. We need you to wire $64,000 right now, immediately. Do not ask questions. If you send the money, they will let this go. We can handle this quietly. Nobody else has to know." I froze. My mind, trained to process risk and financial discrepancies at lightning speed, hit a brick wall. A few hours ago, the crisis was a missing $7,200 for a string quartet and some fireworks. Now, the ransom had skyrocketed to $64,000 to keep someone quiet. $64,000? I repeated, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy register. A vendor hold does not suddenly multiply by a factor of 9 in the middle of the night. Mother, what exactly did you do? In the background, Sloane's sobbing escalated into a high-pitched scream. She must have ripped the phone from our mother's hands because suddenly her voice was piercing my ear, shrill and breathless. "His family left," Sloane shrieked, her words tumbling over each other in sheer panic. "Owen's parents just walked out. They called their driver and they left me here. The event coordinators are talking to the police. They are saying they are going to press charges. Amy, you have to fix this. They are going to put me in jail over a misunderstanding." The adrenaline in my system vanished, replaced by the cold, sterile focus I used when sitting across from a fraudulent contractor. The puzzle pieces were scattered across the table, and they were ugly. The groom's family abandoning the venue, police involvement, confiscated passports, demands for $64,000 in hush money. None of this aligned with a simple, unfortunate cash flow problem. "Stop crying," I ordered Sloane. "Stop crying and give the phone back to Dad. Now." I heard her hyperventilating, but the phone changed hands again. "I am here," my father panted. "I am going to ask you specific questions," I said, pacing slowly across my bedroom floor, staring out at the rain-slicked city. "And you are going to give me exact, literal answers. First, which specific invoices are currently unpaid to warrant a $64,000 demand?" "It is just a misunderstanding with the venue management," my father rushed to say, his tone desperate and placating. "They misunderstood the payment schedule for the catering and the villa rentals." "Lie," I said bluntly. "Venues do not lock out guests over a scheduling misunderstanding on the day of the event." Second question. "Whose names are physically printed on these vendor contracts?" my mother shouted from the background, her voice defensive and shrill. "It was a blanket corporate agreement. The event planner handled the paperwork. We just signed where they told us to sign." "Another lie," I countered, my grip tightening on the phone. "Event planners do not assume personal liability for $64,000 of your debt." Third question. "Why are the police holding your passports?" "Civil disputes over unpaid catering bills, do not result in travel documents being seized by foreign authorities. "The planner is trying to extort us," Sloane screamed from somewhere across the room, her voice echoing off what sounded like a tiled hallway. "She is lying to the police. She told them we tried to flee." I stopped pacing. I stood completely still in the center of my bedroom. The silence on my end of the line was absolute, while the chaos on their end continued to rage. I ran the data points through my head. My father claimed it was a venue scheduling error. My mother claimed it was a confusing corporate agreement handled by the planner. My sister claimed the planner was a malicious extortionist staging a fake crime. 3 different people, 3 entirely different, conflicting narratives attempting to explain the exact same crisis. In my line of work, when a supplier gives you 3 different excuses for a missing shipment, they are not confused. They are hiding the fact that the shipment never existed in the first place. A profound, sickening clarity washed over me. The frantic texts, the staggering jump in the demanded money, the seizure of their passports. This was not a circumstantial mess caused by poor budgeting or simple negligence. A mismanaged budget does not bring the police to a wedding reception. Fraud does, forgery does, intentional, criminal deception does. My family was not calling me to bail them out of a mere embarrassment. They were buried under multiple layers of severe, actionable lies, and the entire structure had just collapsed directly on top of them. And based on the sheer panic in my mother's voice when she demanded I send the money to keep things quiet, I knew they were hiding something far worse than an unpaid bill. "None of you are telling me the truth," I said softly, my voice cutting through their background noise like a scalpel. "Amy, please, we do not have time for this," my mother yelled, grabbing the phone again. "The police officer is walking back over here right now. Just authorize the wire transfer from your primary account. Tell them you are the financial sponsor." The phrase hit me with the force of a physical blow. Financial sponsor. "I am not authorizing anything," I stated, the words tasting like iron in my mouth. "And I am turning my phone off." I ended the call. I did not wait for the screaming to start again. I stood in the dark, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. They had slipped up. In her panic, my mother had used a very specific, legally binding term. The police were not detaining them because of an unpaid bill. They were detaining them because someone had guaranteed those payments, and the guarantee was fraudulent. And I had a terrifying, gut-wrenching suspicion I knew exactly whose name they had used to make that guarantee. I walked out of the bedroom, leaving the phone on the nightstand. I went straight to my home office, turned on the glaring overhead lights, and woke up my computer. The night of quiet avoidance was officially over. It was time to start auditing. I sat down at my workstation, the dual monitors casting a harsh, unforgiving glow across my face. My hands, which had been perfectly steady while talking to my screaming family, now hovered over the mechanical keyboard with a sudden, rigid stiffness. I did not open my standard banking application. A superficial check of my checking account would be useless right now. Instead, I bypassed the commercial portals entirely and logged directly into the executive-level identity and credit monitoring suite I maintain for my own professional security. The dashboard loaded, populating rows of aggregated financial data from the 3 major credit bureaus. I initiated a deep-level query, filtering for any international authorizations, pending hard inquiries, or newly established lines of credit initiated within the last 90 days. The progress bar crept across the screen, a slow, agonizing crawl through the digital infrastructure of my own identity. When the results finally populated, the breath hitched sharply in my throat. There were 3 massive, catastrophic transactions hanging in a pending status, suspended like guillotines over my pristine credit profile. They were not localized errors. They were highly specific, premium authorizations originating from merchants in the Cyclades. The first was a staggering hold for a multi-level cliffside villa, the kind of architectural marvel boasting panoramic caldera views that lifestyle magazines feature on their covers. The second was a substantial deposit locked in for a private, fully staffed luxury yacht charter, specifically designated in the billing notes as a post-wedding bridal brunch excursion. The third charge was secured by an exclusive transportation syndicate, reserving a pristine fleet of restored vintage European automobiles intended to ferry their supposed VIP guests across the island. These were not trivial expenses. These were the foundational pillars of the fake, opulent narrative my sister had been selling to her followers. And every single one of these vendors had bypassed my primary security protocols because they had been fed a very specific, meticulously tailored set of data. I needed the source documents. If my name was tied to these pending authorizations, there had to be a paper trail of signed agreements. I opened a new browser tab and ran a quick diagnostic on my own digital footprint, searching for secondary points of contact tied to my social security number. The system flagged a dormant email address. It was an old shared family inbox I had set up during my sophomore year of college to manage a joint cellular plan and utility bills. I had removed it from my primary devices years ago, but I knew for a fact my parents still utilized the original password for their archaic shared subscriptions. I executed an immediate password reset, locked out all active sessions globally, and forced my way into the inbox. It was an absolute graveyard of automated vendor confirmations, digital invoices, and executed service agreements. The sheer volume of correspondence was nauseating. I opened the most recent attachment, a comprehensive master service agreement from the primary Santorini event coordination firm. I scrolled past the itemized lists of imported white roses and bespoke catering menus, my eyes hunting for the signature block at the bottom of the 40th page. There it was, Amy Chapman. I stared at the black ink rendered on the glowing white screen. It was my signature, but at the same time, it was entirely alien. The visual rhythm was fundamentally wrong. The aggressive, forward-leaning loop of my capital letter was too rounded, too cautious. The sharp, hurried trailing of my surname was completely absent, replaced by a careful, deliberate tracing. It was an imitation executed by someone trying far too hard to be precise. To a forensic auditor, the forgery was laughably apparent, screaming of hesitation and inconsistent pen pressure. But to a stressed, overworked Greek event coordinator sitting in an office thousands of miles away, staring at a digital PDF and desperate to secure a lucrative, high-margin booking, it was more than sufficient to close the deal. I kept scrolling through the attached verification exhibits. A passport scan was required to finalize international liability. I opened the compressed image file and felt a sudden, freezing drop in my stomach. Staring back at me from the screen was my own face, captured in an old identification photo. I recognized the specific scan immediately. I had emailed that exact digital copy to my mother over 7 years prior, back when we were attempting to coordinate a brief family vacation to the Caribbean that ultimately never materialized. She had kept the file saved on her local hard drive all this time. She had not just forged my name, she had weaponized my actual, government-issued identity to bypass the vendor's fraud prevention measures. Every piece of digital correspondence regarding the wedding logistics, every warning about delayed payments, every single request for financial clarification from the Greek vendors had been meticulously routed directly to this dormant, shared inbox. My parents had intentionally isolated the communication. They had built a firewall of deceit, ensuring that I would remain completely blind to the fact that I was legally underwriting their theatrical production until the absolute final hour. I opened the final, most crucial document in the folder, the comprehensive event insurance and liability rider. My eyes scanned the dense blocks of legal text, translating the corporate Greek terminology into the cold, hard reality of international contract law. In the primary designation field, my name was not listed merely as an emergency contact. I was explicitly named as the primary financial sponsor and sole guarantor for the entire multi-day chain of events. My family had effectively leveraged my decade of flawless credit history, my job title at Graylin Port Systems, and my spotless financial reputation to act as a silent, unconsenting co-signer for a party they had absolutely no liquid capital to afford. But it was Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the liability rider that caused the air in my quiet apartment to turn to ice. It was a standard, yet utterly lethal. indemnification clause utilized in high-risk foreign contracts. The legal jargon was complex, but the underlying mechanism was terrifyingly simple. It stated that in the event of a total default or an active dispute regarding unpaid balances, if the designated guarantor initiates any form of monetary transfer to the vendor, regardless of the amount, that singular action legally constitutes a binding, irrevocable admission of total financial responsibility for the entire outstanding ledger. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together, forming a picture of premeditated, staggering cruelty. This was the reason my mother had texted me mere hours ago, utilizing her familiar, casual tone to beg for exactly $7,200. It was never about releasing a hold for a string quartet or a fireworks display. It was a calculated, desperate trap. If I had succumbed to my old habits, if I had sighed in frustration and wired that initial, smaller amount just to make her stop texting me, I would have triggered the legal clause. I would have instantly, legally bound myself to the entire, catastrophic debt of the ruined wedding. When that initial trap failed because I replied with a single, firm word of refusal, the entire fragile house of cards collapsed, leading to the frantic, panicked demands for the full $64,000 in hush money. I pushed my chair back from the desk. The rhythmic sound of the Seattle rain hitting the glass felt incredibly distant now. This was not a last-minute, desperate improvisation by a family backed into a corner by unforeseen circumstances. A mistake is forgetting to budget for a gratuity. A panic response is asking to borrow a credit card to cover an unexpected delay. This was structural. This was architectural. They had actively, maliciously prepared me as their designated casualty weeks, possibly months, in advance. They had stolen my identity, forged my signature, rerouted the communications, and set a legally binding snare, all while smiling at me through video calls and complaining about the cost of floral centerpieces. They had constructed an elaborate, highly flammable stage for Sloane to dance on, and they had permanently chained me to the supporting pillars, fully intending to let me burn when the entire structure inevitably caught fire. I looked at my own face on the stolen passport scan. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the familiar, crushing weight of familial betrayal to break me down, to make me reach for my phone and scream at them across the ocean, but the tears absolutely refused to fall. The sorrow was entirely burned away, replaced by a brilliant, blinding white clarity. They had treated me like a lifeless corporate asset to be liquidated for their own benefit. They had utilized my professional skills and my financial stability against me. They had fundamentally forgotten that my professional expertise is not merely about having good credit. My expertise lies in systematically dismantling fraudulent enterprises and destroying the people who build them. I moved my mouse to the center of the clean, organized desktop screen. I right-clicked the mouse. I selected the option to create a new, empty directory. I typed the title with slow, deliberate keystrokes. Santorini file. I pressed the Enter key, locking the folder into existence. I began to drag and drop the forged contracts, the stolen passport scans, the IP logs from the email routing, and the damning insurance clauses into the directory. The time for being the solid, dependable daughter was permanently over. The audit had officially begun. The digital trail left by a desperate person is always sloppy, but the trail left by an arrogant person is entirely transparent. I did not need to be a seasoned forensic accountant to dismantle the architecture of my family's deceit. I simply needed to follow the capital. I needed to understand the genesis of their cash flow. Where did they acquire the initial seed money to secure the venue deposits before they resorted to forging my signature for the remaining balance? I closed out of the credit bureau portal and opened a highly encrypted tab for a private wealth management firm. 7 years ago, when my career first began to yield substantial bonuses, I established a dedicated, interest-bearing trust account. It was explicitly and legally earmarked for my parents' eventual assisted living and long-term medical care. I had been depositing a steady percentage of my income into it every single quarter, granting my father joint administrative access purely for catastrophic health emergencies. I clicked on the Transaction History tab. The current balance displayed in bold black text was zero. Over the course of the last 14 months, almost $140,000 had been systematically bled out of the trust in a series of calculated, mid-sized withdrawals. They had not spent a single cent on co-payments, health insurance premiums, or retirement planning. My parents had cannibalized their own end-of-life security to fund a bespoke couture bridal gown, an armada of aerial drone cinematographers, and a rented luxury estate designated exclusively as a content house for social media influencers to take staged photographs leading up to the ceremony. Digging deeper into the synchronized email inbox I had just breached, I uncovered the ultimate motive behind this staggering financial suicide. It was a 50-page exclusivity contract with a high-tier luxury wedding media outlet. Sloan had not just planned a party, she had brokered a highly monetized brand activation. The contract stipulated that if the wedding footage was delivered flawlessly, matching a very specific, wealthy aesthetic, Sloan would unlock a lucrative series of post-wedding lifestyle sponsorships. She was attempting to transition from a failed skincare entrepreneur into a professional, sponsored wife. However, there was a brutally punitive cancellation clause attached. If the event failed to occur, or if the visual output fell below their rigorously defined standards, she would be personally liable for massive breach of contract penalties. She had literally bet the entire family's financial existence and my legal identity on her ability to play the role of a wealthy, flawless bride for one weekend. This revelation fundamentally shifted the frantic narrative my family had been screaming at me over the phone. They had tried to paint the groom, Owen Mercer, as a villain who callously abandoned my sister at the altar in her hour of need. But as I read through an email thread forwarded between my mother and Sloan, a completely different reality emerged. Owen was not a coward. He was a man who had stumbled into an active crime scene. 2 days prior to the ceremony, several local Greek vendors had approached Owen directly, complaining about chronically missing payments. When Owen confronted my family with these accusations, my father had produced digital wire transfer receipts to prove the money was currently in transit. But Owen's family possessed actual, generational wealth, and they intimately understood international banking infrastructure. The Mercers immediately recognized my father's receipts for what they were: clumsy, easily disprovable digital fabrications. The Mercer family had demanded an immediate, indefinite postponement of the entire wedding to conduct a forensic audit of the event's finances. They wanted to know exactly who they were merging families with. Instead of coming clean or halting the production, my parents and Sloan chose to double down on the deception. They panicked. They aggressively pushed the ceremony forward, manipulating the timeline and forcing the vows to be exchanged before the Mercers could legally or socially halt the production. They genuinely believed they could trap a wealthy family into a marriage by simply outrunning a forged paper trail. But the truth is a relentless creditor, and it always collects. Through the frantic emails from the event coordinators and the attached incident reports, I could visualize exactly how the reception had violently imploded. The Greek vendors, realizing the wire transfers were completely fake and that the wealthy Mercer family was entirely withdrawing their financial backing, executed the only leverage they had left. Right in the middle of the lavish evening reception, as hundreds of guests in tailored suits and silk dresses mingled under imported floral arches, the local organizers pulled the plug, literally. The power to the elevated DJ booth and the live musicians was abruptly cut, replacing the curated ambient music with a shocking, heavy silence. The premium open bar, stocked with top-shelf liquor paid for by my stolen identity, was shuttered and padlocked by security personnel. The polished, heavily filtered illusion my sister had spent $140,000 of my money to build cracked wide open under the harsh, unyielding light of reality. In our modern era, where everyone holds a high-definition camera in their pocket, a disaster of this magnitude is instantly documented. I could easily imagine the guests pulling out their phones, their faces illuminated by the screens, recording the sudden darkness, the shouting coordinators in the background, and my sister's perfectly contoured face crumbling in real time as her sponsored fairy tale disintegrated. And in the middle of this unprecedented social humiliation, while his youngest daughter was hyperventilating in front of her newly alienated in-laws, what did my father do? According to a preliminary incident report, drafted by the venue's legal counsel, which had been automatically forwarded to the shared inbox, Derek Chapman did not try to comfort his weeping daughter. He did not attempt to negotiate calmly with the vendors. Instead, he made a desperate, frantic dash for the reception gift table. He attempted to shove handfuls of thick cash envelopes and gift cards from the guests into his suit jacket, loudly claiming to the confused attendees that he was simply securing them for safekeeping. The venue security personnel, viewing a highly agitated man actively trying to abscond with untraceable cash while owing their employers tens of thousands of dollars, immediately intervened. They viewed his actions not as a father protecting gifts, but as the physical seizure of assets during an active financial dispute. That was the scuffle I had heard over the phone. That was the exact reason the local police were called to the cliffside villa. That was why their passports were currently sitting on a desk in a Greek police precinct. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the glowing screens casting a pale light across my dark living room. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. I had not simply been dragged into a piece of bad luck. I was not dealing with a family that had merely mismanaged a budget. I was the foundational anchor of a massive, multi-layered fraud scheme designed exclusively to subsidize my sister's digital vanity and my parents' desperate need for social validation. They had sacrificed their own medical future, alienated the groom's family with counterfeit banking documents, and orchestrated a highly public scam. They had built a magnificent, towering stage out of lies. And when they realized the stage was structurally unsound and destined to collapse, they did not try to reinforce it. They simply chained me to the load-bearing pillars and walked away, fully expecting my pristine reputation and my bank accounts to absorb the crushing weight of the falling debris. I walked back into my dark bedroom to retrieve my mobile device from the nightstand. I needed it to authenticate a two-factor security protocol for my cloud storage. But as I picked it up, the screen lit up with an incoming call from an unrecognized international number. It was not my mother's cellular line. It was likely a landline from the venue manager's office or perhaps the local police precinct. I accepted the call and raised the speaker to my ear, remaining completely silent. "Amy, you need to stop acting like a child and listen to me." My mother's voice snapped through the receiver. The chaotic background noise of shouting vendors and crying guests had vanished. She was in a quiet room now, and her tone had undergone a chilling metamorphosis. The frantic, weeping desperation was entirely gone, replaced by a hard, venomous edge of absolute authority. "I am listening, Pamela," I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth or familial deference. "I am listening to you explain exactly how you bypassed a notarized identity check for an international insurance binder." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She did not expect me to know the specific terminology. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before her natural arrogance took over. "I did what I had to do," she hissed, her words dripping with self-righteous indignation. The Greek coordinators were being impossibly strict about the liability waivers. They wanted a verified proxy, so I gave them one. "I used the medical power of attorney you signed for us 5 years ago when you had your gallbladder removed. I sent them that document along with the copy of your passport. It proved you trusted us to make decisions on your behalf." The sheer audacity of her confession felt like a physical drop in atmospheric pressure. A medical proxy is designed to allow a parent to authorize life-saving surgery if their child is incapacitated in a hospital bed. My mother had taken that sacred, legally binding document of absolute trust and actively misrepresented it to foreign event planners as a blanket financial authorization to underwrite a lavish party. "That is not borrowing, Mother," I stated, articulating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. "That is premeditated identity theft. That is wire fraud." Instead of breaking down, instead of offering even a hollow apology for crossing a line that could send her to federal prison, my mother went on the offensive. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she barked, her voice echoing slightly in whatever room she was confined to. If you had just been reasonable from the very beginning, if you had just agreed to cover the budget like a supportive sister, I would not have had to be so flexible with the paperwork. You forced my hand, Amy. You backed us into a corner with your selfish hoarding, and now you are trying to play the victim. She was actively blaming me for her decision to commit a felony. In her warped, narcissistic reality, my refusal to act as an unconditional funding source was the true crime, and her forgery was merely a necessary, justifiable workaround. I am hanging up now, I said. If you hang up, you will regret it, she threatened. But I had already severed the connection. The moment the call ended, a notification for a new voicemail appeared on my screen. It was from Sloane. I pressed play, standing perfectly still in the center of my bedroom. My younger sister did not sound like a panicked bride whose fairy tale had just imploded. She sounded like a cornered snake. Her voice was low, steady, and practically vibrating with malice. Listen to me very carefully, you bitter, jealous sociopath, Sloane whispered into her microphone. I know exactly what you are doing. You have always hated me because I am the one people actually look at. You could not stand the fact that I was getting a flawless, high-profile wedding while you rot alone in a miserable apartment. So you planned this. You are the one who managed the budget. You are the financial sponsor. I have documents with your name on them. If you do not wire the $64,000 to the coordinator in the next 10 minutes, I am going to turn my camera on. I am going to tell my 2 million followers that my cruel, controlling older sister manipulated my entire wedding finances and intentionally pulled the funding at the absolute last minute just to destroy my life out of pure spite. I will ruin you. The audio file ended with a sharp click. I stared at the blank screen, the cruelty of her words sinking into my skin like ice water. She was going to leverage her massive social media audience to frame me as the architect of her destruction. Before I could even process the sheer scale of Sloane's threat, a text message pushed through from my father. It read, "The authorities are separating us for formal statements. I am looking at the police report right now. If you do not authorize the wire transfer immediately, I am going to sign my name at the bottom of this page. I will tell the investigator that you orchestrated every single contract from the United States. I will testify that I was merely acting as your physical proxy on the ground. Send the money, Amy. Do not force me to protect myself from your mess." My breathing stopped. The air in my apartment felt entirely depleted of oxygen. This was the final, terrifying evolution of the Chapman family dynamic. They were no longer begging me to swoop in and rescue them from their own staggering incompetence. They were actively, methodically preparing to push me off the cliff to break their own fall. They were constructing a cohesive, multi-layered narrative to shift the entire burden of their criminal liability squarely onto my shoulders. My mother had the forged documents. My sister had the public platform to destroy my social standing. My father was holding the pen, ready to sign a sworn police statement framing me for international fraud. The danger I was facing was no longer just about losing my savings. It was an existential threat to my entire life. I thought about my position at Grayland Port Systems. I am currently the lead director on a highly sensitive, multi-million-dollar supplier audit. My entire career is predicated on my unimpeachable integrity, my flawless background checks, and my absolute adherence to corporate compliance. If a local Greek magistrate opens an official fraud investigation under my name, if Sloane unleashes a viral smear campaign accusing me of financial sabotage, the compliance officers at my firm will not wait for a court verdict. They will suspend my security clearance immediately. They will freeze my corporate access by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. My career, the quiet, stable life I have bled for over the last 15 years, will be utterly obliterated before the truth even has a chance to put its boots on. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were pointing a loaded gun directly at my livelihood. I walked slowly back to my home office, my mind racing through the terrifying paradox they had constructed. It was a perfectly designed hostage situation. If I refused to pay, they would execute their threats, sign the false statements, and initiate a scandal that would destroy my professional reputation. But if I gave in, if I logged into my banking portal right now and wired the $64,000 to the Greek event coordinators to buy their silence, I would be signing my own death warrant. I remembered the brutal indemnification clause buried in the forged insurance rider I had just read. If the guarantor initiates any form of monetary transfer, it constitutes a binding, irrevocable admission of total financial responsibility. If I transferred the funds tonight, I would indeed save them from the police station today, but the digital wire transfer would act as an undeniable, legal ratification of their forgery. By paying the ransom, I would legally legitimize the fraudulent contracts. I would permanently tie myself to their crimes, officially adopting hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit debt, and guaranteeing that they could continue to bleed me dry for the rest of my natural life. They thought they had trapped me in an impossible dilemma. They believed I was still the obedient, terrified daughter who would choose self-sacrifice over family conflict. They expected me to break. I sat down at my desk, placed my phone next to the keyboard, and looked at the glowing folder labeled Santorini file. My family had finally shown me their true faces. There was no love left to mourn. There was only a war to win. I stopped responding to the threats. Engaging with emotional terrorists only validates their leverage and provides them with additional ammunition. I muted my parents and my sister across all communication channels, plunging my mobile device back into absolute silence. The time for familial negotiation, for begging for the truth, or for attempting to salvage any semblance of a relationship had officially expired. I pivoted my mindset entirely. I was no longer a betrayed daughter frantically trying to understand her family. I was the director of supplier risk control facing a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar internal fraud case. When corporate assets and legal liabilities are on the line, you do not cry. You build an impenetrable, airtight fortress of empirical evidence. I opened the folder I had created on my desktop and began to populate it with the unassailable architecture of my defense. My first objective was establishing a flawless, irrefutable alibi. My father was currently threatening to sign a sworn statement telling the Greek authorities that I was actively coordinating this international scam from behind the scenes. I needed to prove, geographically and temporally, that I was entirely disconnected from their Aegean theater. I logged into the Grayland Port Systems employee portal and exported my physical building access logs for the past 3 months. Every single time my keycard swiped the turnstiles in our Seattle headquarters, a secure timestamp was generated. I downloaded my virtual meeting histories, cross-referencing them with my secure parking garage receipts to show a continuous, unbroken pattern of local presence. I pulled my residential portal data, downloading the lobby security camera stills that captured my daily exits and entries in my work attire. To completely seal the perimeter, I ran a comprehensive sweep of my passport number through international flight databases, generating a certified digital report proving I had not boarded a single flight out of the country in over 4 years. I had a concrete, minute-by-minute digital map proving I was 3,000 miles away from their crime scene. Next, I needed to tie the weapon directly to their hands. The forged contracts in the shared email inbox were incredibly damaging, but I needed to prove exactly who executed them. I initiated a secure chat protocol with a professional contact I maintained inside my primary bank's fraud detection division. Bypassing the standard customer service queue, I requested a deep packet inspection of the IP addresses that had accessed those specific electronic signature portals. The report pinged back to my inbox 20 minutes later. The digital footprint did not originate from a masked proxy server or an anonymous routing network. The geolocation coordinates were laughably precise. The contract document packages had been opened, signed, and submitted from a residential internet service provider located exactly 2.4 miles from my parents' retirement condominium in Naples, Florida. The timestamp on the IP log matched the exact day my mother had previously complained to me about losing her home internet router and having to use the wireless network at the local country club. As I was formatting the network logs into a readable spreadsheet, an unexpected notification chimed on my personal email. The sender name made my hands pause over the keyboard. Natalie Mercer, the older sister of the groom. I had only met her twice during brief, highly manicured introductory dinners back in the United States, but I remembered her as a sharp, observant corporate litigator who seemed inherently immune to Sloane's performative charm. She had bypassed my compromised family channels and found my direct contact information through a mutual professional networking site. I opened the message. There were no polite pleasantries. Natalie wrote that she had spent the last several hours trapped in a Greek police precinct, listening to my family aggressively throw my name around as their designated financial scapegoat. She stated bluntly that she knew a sinking ship when she saw one, and she refused to let her own family become collateral damage in the Chapman circus. Attached to the email were multiple files. The first attachment was a series of screenshots from a private group chat between Sloane and Owen. In the texts, Sloane was brazenly bragging about her financial safety net. I read the exact words my sister had typed to her fiancé just 2 weeks prior. She wrote that she never worried about going over her luxury budget because her older sister always cleans up her trash behind her. The second attachment from Natalie was far worse. It was a short, candid video filmed on a mobile phone during the lavish rehearsal dinner. The camera panned across a beautifully decorated table, capturing my mother holding a glass of champagne, holding court with several of the groom's wealthy aunts. My mother was laughing, a bright, careless, arrogant sound. I turned up the volume on my computer speakers and listened to her exact words. She told the table that the wedding costs were absolutely astronomical, but she added, with a dismissive wave of her hand, that her eldest daughter has a perfect credit score, so she never really worries about the final bill. The final piece of Natalie's email contained copies of email chains between my family and the local event coordinators. Natalie had managed to convince the venue manager to forward them to her during the chaotic standoff at the villa. Reading through the correspondence, I discovered another terrifying layer of their trap. My family had explicitly promised at least 3 distinct high-end vendors that if any budget overages occurred on the day of the event, the financial sponsor, explicitly naming me, would wire the outstanding balance within 2 hours. They guaranteed the vendors that no questions would be asked. They had effectively weaponized my professional reputation to buy themselves a 2-hour grace period to execute their scam, leaving me completely blind to the ticking clock. Every new document I dragged into the folder, every screenshot I read, felt like a physical incision against my skin. The betrayal was so absolute, so casually executed, that it defied basic human comprehension. They had monetized my loyalty, forged my identity, and laughed about it over imported champagne. But a strange, profound psychological shift was occurring within me as I sat in the dark. For 35 years, emotional pain inflicted by my family had always made me pliable. It had made me fold, compromise, and reach for my wallet just to make the hurting stop. Tonight was fundamentally different. The pain did not soften my resolve. It crystallized it. The grief of realizing I had no real family burned away completely, leaving behind a terrifying, cold exactitude. I was no longer a victim reacting to trauma. I was an auditor constructing an execution. I opened a blank master document and began to build the timeline. I am exceptionally good at timelines. I mapped out every single event chronologically. I logged the exact hour my mother asked for the initial $7,200, placing it right next to the corresponding clause in the insurance rider that would have legally bound me to the entire debt if I had paid it. I charted the exact day the IP address in Florida accessed the forgery portal. I matched Sloane's venomous, threatening voicemails against her arrogant text messages to Owen. I juxtaposed my father's desperate threats of police perjury with the undeniable corporate access logs, proving I was sitting at a desk in Seattle. I color-coded the entries: red for financial fraud, blue for identity theft, black for extortion. As the sun finally began to rise over the Seattle skyline, casting a pale, gray morning light into my apartment, the document was complete. It was no longer just a collection of digital files. It was a comprehensive, undeniable map of betrayal. It detailed exactly who said what, at what specific time, which fraudulent contracts were executed, What specific funds were drained from the medical trust? And what specific threats were left on my voicemail? The narrative they were currently spinning to the Greek authorities was a flimsy, panicked improvisation built on panic. The narrative sitting on my hard drive was made of reinforced steel. Digging through the archived folders of that compromised family inbox, I found a thread dating back 7 weeks. The subject line was remarkably mundane, merely discussing floral upgrades for the rehearsal dinner. But buried deep within the fourth reply was a direct message from my mother to the lead event coordinator in Greece. The planner had expressed professional concern over a sudden, massive budget expansion for imported orchids. My mother replied with absolute, terrifying casualness. I stared at the screen as her words burned themselves into my memory. If there are any unexpected overages, my eldest daughter will handle it. She always handles it. That single, brutally short sentence completely dismantled the last remaining shadow of a doubt I possessed. They had never crossed their fingers and blindly hoped the destination event would magically stay within their non-existent budget. The catastrophic overspending was a deliberate feature of their master plan, not an accidental bug. From the very first day they toured those cliffside venues, they had already designated me as their financial safety valve. I was the built-in contingency plan for their theft. They had planned to sacrifice my financial stability before they even mailed out the first physical invitation. I needed to fully understand why they drove the car off the cliff even after the groom's family discovered the forged wire receipts. Why not just feign an illness and cancel the event to save themselves from jail? I reopened the luxury media exclusivity agreement I had found earlier. I bypassed the sponsorship payout structures and scrolled directly down to the breach of contract addendums. There it was, an insolvency penalty clause. If Sloane postponed the ceremony, or if word leaked to the press or her social media followers that the event was financially insolvent, she would not just lose her future brand sponsorships. She would be held personally liable for a fine of $250,000 for reputational damage to the media outlet. That specific clause explained the absolute lunacy of the last 48 hours. It explained why my parents and my sister recklessly forced the reception to happen even after the vendors were actively threatening to walk out. They were not just terrified of losing money, they were absolutely terrified of losing their perfect public narrative. To them, appearing poor in front of a luxury magazine editor was a fate far worse than committing international wire fraud. They tried to outrun a massive legal penalty by sacrificing my entire professional life on the altar of their social media aesthetics. Further down the inbox, another vital piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place. 3 days ago, the local Greek coordinator had sent a flagged, high-priority email demanding direct verbal confirmation from the named guarantor. The locals had clearly grown highly suspicious of my parents' constant deflections, their excuses about time zones, and the clumsy, fabricated digital bank receipts. The event staff knew something was fundamentally wrong before the first bottle of champagne was ever uncorked. My family had been dodging those requests, stalling for time, desperately hoping they could trap the groom and finalize the legal marriage certificate before the entire facade crumbled beneath their feet. I opened a new browser window and pulled up the relevant international statutes regarding cross-border financial impersonation and identity theft. I read the legal definitions with the cold, practiced eye of a corporate risk auditor. The false narrative my family was desperately trying to sell to the police in Santorini right now was incredibly fragile. It relied entirely on my continued silence and my historical willingness to absorb their abuse to keep the peace. But the law was exceptionally explicit. I realized that if I presented my geographic proof, the network IP logs, and the documented history of their extortion threats to the correct official, the story would invert in a matter of seconds. It would shift instantly from a wealthy American family dealing with a stubborn, unsupportive sister into a highly coordinated syndicate of identity thieves, getting caught red-handed by their own victim. I did not need to fly to Europe to defend myself. I just needed to put the correct evidence in front of the correct investigator at the exact right moment. The pale morning light was slowly creeping across the hardwood floorboards of my living room, but I remained seated in the shadows of my desk, my hand resting motionless on the mouse. I reached over and tapped the play button on my mobile device one more time, letting Sloane's venomous voicemail echo loudly through the quiet apartment. I listened to her call me a bitter, jealous sociopath. I listened to her threaten to destroy my reputation and my career in front of 2 million strangers. For 35 years, I had been rigorously conditioned to believe that setting a boundary was an act of extreme cruelty. I had been meticulously raised to fear being the villain in their heavily edited story. I had swallowed my own ambition, sacrificed my own comfort, and drained my own resources just to avoid the crushing guilt they so expertly weaponized against me whenever I dared to say no. I had always believed that if I just proved my worth through my bank account, they would eventually treat me like a human being instead of a human shield. But as my sister's screeching voice faded into the absolute silence of the room, the invisible chains that had bound me to them finally, permanently shattered. I saw them clearly now. They were not parents and a sister who had simply lost their way under the pressure of a wedding. They were parasites who had found a willing, highly profitable host. In that singular, defining moment, I permanently surrendered the exhausting, lifelong mission of trying to save a familial relationship that had actually been dead for over a decade. The Chapmans did not want a loving daughter. They wanted a casualty. They wanted a scapegoat to bleed out so they could keep dancing. But the victim they had spent months carefully preparing for the slaughter had just rewritten the script. I closed my eyes, took one deep, steadying breath, and felt a profound, unprecedented sense of peace wash over my chest. I did not need to rescue them anymore. The only things I needed to save today were my good name, my immaculate career, and the entire rest of my life. The digital assault did not simply stop because I refused to engage. It merely mutated, finding new, more aggressive avenues to penetrate my silence. My phone screen became a steady, nauseating feed of psychological warfare. Sloane, having realized her number was restricted on my end, had clearly commandeered a local Greek mobile phone to bypass my communication block. She sent a rapid-fire succession of high-resolution images designed specifically to break my resolve. The first was a photograph of her huddled on a hard plastic chair in what looked like a stark, fluorescent-lit precinct waiting area. Her bespoke bridal makeup was intentionally smeared, dark tracks running down her pale cheeks to stain the collar of her expensive silk robe. The accompanying text message was a masterclass in narcissistic victimhood. She wrote that if I did absolutely nothing right now, her entire life was permanently over. She accused me of possessing a cold, unnatural heart, stating that my petty cruelty was actively destroying my own flesh and blood. She was playing the role of the innocent maiden sacrificed to a dragon, entirely ignoring the undeniable fact that she was the one who had purchased the dragon, brought it to the village, and pointed it directly at my house. When the visual guilt trip failed to solicit an immediate wire transfer, my mother deployed her own contingency plan. Pamela sent an audio file from yet another unrecognized international number. The frantic, weeping mother routine she had utilized hours ago was completely gone. Her voice was now flat, metallic, and utterly devoid of any maternal warmth or hesitation. She stated, with chilling clarity, that if I did not authorize the release of the funds within the hour, she was fully prepared to escalate the situation beyond the local authorities. She threatened to speak directly to the American press and, more dangerously, to the corporate compliance officers at Grayland Port Systems. My mother claimed she would tell anyone who would listen that the entire Aegean spectacle was actually my mastermind project. She threatened to testify that I had intentionally designed the labyrinthine wedding budget and routed it through foreign vendors specifically to evade domestic tax obligations. She was casually offering to frame me for federal tax evasion just to escape a luxury party bill she had run up using my stolen identity. She knew exactly which pressure points would threaten my security clearance at the firm, and she was pressing them with surgical precision. Then came the absolute killing blow. My father, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders at the state fair when I was 6 years old, sent a scanned PDF document to my personal email. It was a drafted, unsigned police statement, helpfully translated into English. I read the sterile, bureaucratic paragraphs, with a heart rapidly turning to stone. In his proposed sworn testimony, Derek Chapman claimed that he and my mother were merely passive, confused actors in a foreign country. The legal document explicitly stated that I had actively, intentionally put my own name down on every single vendor contract for the specific purpose of financial administration and overseas asset management. He painted me as the shadowy, controlling architect of the entire financial disaster, claiming I had maliciously pulled the funding at the 11th hour to exact some sort of sick sibling revenge. This was the most profoundly shocking moment of my 35 years on Earth. There was no more pretense of clumsy parental love. There was no more hiding behind the flimsy excuse of a temporary financial misunderstanding. My own father was not just throwing me under the bus. He was handing me the intricate blueprint of the vehicle he intended to use to crush me. He was offering me one final chance to pay the exorbitant ransom before he turned the ignition key. He sent the exact, itemized plan to bury my personal reputation and my professional career alive if I refused to submit to their extortion. I did not reply to Sloane's pathetic photographs. I did not respond to my mother's venomous voice note. I did not acknowledge my father's fabricated legal draft. Instead, I connected my secure laptop to my heavy-duty laser printer. The machine whirred to life in the absolute quiet of my apartment, methodically spitting out page after page of warm, crisp paper. I printed the network internet protocol logs, the geographical timestamps, the forged signature comparisons, the extortion threat transcripts, and the certified bank statements proving my complete innocence. I created 3 separate physical copies of the master file. I uploaded encrypted digital backups to multiple secure cloud servers. I backed the entire folder onto a solid-state external hard drive, locking it inside my fireproof safe. When the printing process was finally complete, I gathered the thick stack of paper, tapping the edges firmly against the solid oak wood of my desk to align them perfectly. I took my mobile phone and placed it face up next to the towering stack of documents. I lowered the device slowly, deliberately. The physical motion felt incredibly heavy, as if I were finally laying down a brutal, exhausting sentence that I had been forced to carry for my entire adulthood. The Chapman family bank was permanently closed, and the vault was sealed. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and stared at the silent device. My decade of corporate risk management training kicked in. Analyzing the battlefield with absolute, emotionless clarity, I realized a fundamental truth about crisis communications and legal liability. If I continued to simply play defense from my apartment in Seattle, if I just sat here in the dark and waited for the international fallout to eventually reach my doorstep, I was going to lose. The first person to establish a cohesive narrative in a vacuum of information is almost always the person the public and the investigating authorities choose to believe first. If my family successfully told the Greek investigators that I was a rogue, vindictive tax evader who abandoned them at the altar, I would spend the next 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees desperately trying to untangle their web of lies. I could not afford to let them write the opening chapter of this disaster. I had to strike first, and I had to strike with absolute, devastating precision. But timing was everything. A fragmented, panicked attack would only allow them room to spin new, more elaborate lies to cover their tracks. I needed them completely cornered. I needed to wait until I possessed absolute, undeniable certainty that all 3 of them were trapped in the exact same room, surrounded by the specific people they were actively trying to defraud. I monitored the read receipts and the digital timestamps of their increasingly desperate messages. I cross-referenced their communication timeline with the specific emails Natalie Mercer had forwarded me earlier in the night. According to the official precinct schedule Natalie had mentioned in her correspondence, the local Greek magistrate, the villa representative, and the lead event coordinator were scheduled to take formal, joint statements from the Chapman family at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, local time. I pulled up a dual time zone clock on my desktop monitor. I sat in the dim light of my office and watched the seconds tick by. I felt the tension coil incredibly tight in my chest, a physical, heavy pressure building relentlessly behind my ribs. The torrential rain outside had finally stopped, leaving the Seattle sky a bruised, pale gray as dawn threatened to break over the city skyline. When the digital clock hit the exact scheduled minute, I knew with absolute certainty that my parents and my sister were sitting in a sterile, brightly lit room across the world. I knew they were preparing to sign my life away to save their own skin. I knew that in this specific moment, my words could no longer be twisted by intermediaries, nor could they be filtered through my mother's manipulative, weeping translations. I picked up my mobile phone. I opened the contacts directory. I completely ignored the familiar names of my mother, my father, and my sister. I scrolled past them, my thumb moving with cold, mechanical certainty. I stopped on exactly one specific, newly added name. I stared at the glowing screen, letting the heavy, irreversible reality of what I was about to do wash over me. I took one long, incredibly deep breath, filling my lungs with the quiet, still air of my sanctuary. Then, I pressed call. The international ringtone hummed in my ear, a hollow, rhythmic sound crossing thousands of miles of ocean and fiber optic cable. I did not have to wait long. On the third ring, the line connected with a sharp click, followed by the muffled background noise of a busy room and the weary, heavily accented voice of a man answering with his official title. I was speaking directly to investigator Leonidas Petros of the local Economic Crimes Unit in Santorini. "My name is Amy Chapman," I said. My voice was completely steady, stripped of any familial emotion, vibrating only with the cold, absolute authority of a corporate auditor neutralizing a threat. "I am calling you from my home in Seattle, Washington. I understand you are currently sitting in a room with Elena Marcoux, the event coordinator, Nikos Arvanis, the legal representative for the Cliffside Villa, and 3 American citizens who are actively attempting to execute a sworn affidavit involving my name." There was a stunned, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The background murmurs abruptly ceased. Investigator Petros cleared his throat, his tone instantly shifting from bureaucratic fatigue to sharp, focused attention. He confirmed that my parents and my sister were indeed sitting just on the other side of the glass partition, preparing to formalize their testimony regarding my supposed sudden withdrawal of international funding. "Do not let them sign that document," I instructed clearly. "Every single vendor contract, insurance rider, and liability waiver bearing the signature of Amy Chapman currently sitting on your desk is a fraudulent document. I did not sign them. I did not authorize them. I have not left the United States in 4 years. I am not a financial sponsor. I am the victim of a coordinated, cross-border identity theft perpetrated by the 3 individuals sitting in your precinct." I did not give him time to doubt me. I did not offer a tearful story about my broken childhood or my sister's vanity. Authorities do not care about family drama. They care about actionable evidence. "While we are speaking," I continued, my fingers flying across my keyboard, "I am transmitting a secure, encrypted email directly to your official department inbox. It contains a comprehensive digital dossier. I advise you to open it immediately." I heard the faint, distinct chime of an incoming notification through the receiver. Investigator Petros asked me to hold. I listened to the hollow silence, imagining the harsh fluorescent lights of the Greek police station. I pictured my father, pen in hand, completely unaware that the scheme he had so carefully prepared for me had just quietly folded back in on him instead. "I have the file," Petros finally murmured. I could hear the rapid clicking of his computer mouse as he opened the attachments. "You will find certified physical access logs and biometric timestamps, proving I have been inside my corporate headquarters in Seattle every single day for the past 3 months. I guided him through the destruction of their lies. You will find a forensic internet protocol trace provided by my bank, proving that the electronic signatures on your vendor contracts were executed from a residential network in Naples, Florida, exactly 2.4 miles from my parents' primary residence. You will find bank statements showing the systematic draining of a medical trust fund to pay your local vendors' initial deposits. Finally, you will find multiple audio recordings of extortion, left on my voicemail less than 1 hour ago, in which those three individuals explicitly threatened to destroy my career with false statements if I refused to pay their $64,000 ransom. The psychological atmosphere on the other end of the line completely inverted in a matter of seconds. I could hear Petros speaking rapidly in Greek to Elena Marcu and the villa's lawyer. I heard the sharp, collective intake of breath as the local victims realized the scope of the deception. The incident was instantly upgraded. It was no longer a messy civil dispute over a ruined wedding reception. It was an open and shut criminal case of felony wire fraud, forgery, and the provision of false information to foreign law enforcement. Petros did not ask me any further questions about my family's character. He simply thanked me for the overwhelming volume of evidence, instructed me to remain available for official consulate follow-ups, and hung up the phone. The immediate aftermath was swift, brutal, and entirely out of my hands. According to the updates I received days later from Natalie Mercer, the moment investigator Petros stepped out of his office, he immediately separated my parents and Sloan into 3 different interrogation rooms. Criminal conspiracies built by arrogant people always shatter under isolation. Sloan broke first. Stripped of my mother's protective maneuvering and terrified by the prospect of a foreign jail cell, my sister's fragile narrative collapsed. When pressed by investigators about the specific terms of her luxury media exclusivity contract and the massive financial penalties she faced for cancellation, she began to contradict her own timeline. She stumbled over the details of her sponsored image payouts, and when asked who specifically promised that her older sister would cover the budget, she panicked and blamed our mother. The very lies she had crafted to secure her perfect digital image turned into a noose that choked her legal defense to death. The final, devastating blow did not even come from my dossier. It came from the groom's family. Owen and Natalie Mercer walked into the precinct and handed investigator Petros a thick stack of printed text messages. The logs proved conclusively that the Mercers had repeatedly demanded financial transparency for weeks leading up to the ceremony, and that Derek and Pamela Chapman had aggressively hidden the truth, further proving premeditated deceit. The Chapman family's desperate, 11th-hour attempt to pin the blame on an absentee, vindictive sister evaporated into thin air. The ensuing fallout was an absolute masterclass in the consequences of unchecked entitlement. My parents did not go to federal prison, but they paid a price that was, to them, far more agonizing. To avoid international prosecution and satisfy the furious Greek vendors, they were forced to immediately liquidate their primary asset. The sprawling, beautifully manicured house in Naples, Florida, the ultimate symbol of their fabricated status, was sold at a massive loss to cover the severe legal restitution and the compounding lawyer fees. Sloane's fairy tale ending became a digital nightmare. The luxury wedding outlet completely voided her contract, citing the morality and fraud clauses buried in the fine print. Word of the disastrous, unpaid cliffside reception leaked rapidly through her curated social circles. The influencers she had desperately tried to impress quickly distanced themselves, leaving her socially ostracized and entirely bankrupt of the only currency she ever truly valued, public admiration. The dream wedding she had tried to buy with my stolen identity became a permanent, bitter internet cautionary tale about the grotesque reality of fake wealth. As for me, I remained in Seattle. I spent the next few weeks working methodically with my banks and the major credit bureaus, utilizing the police reports to permanently scrub the fraudulent inquiries from my financial history. I proactively disclosed the situation to the compliance board at Grayland Port Systems, presenting them with the closed case file. My security clearance was never questioned. In fact, my immediate supervisor quietly praised my ruthless efficiency in neutralizing a major liability. I changed my phone number. I moved to a high-security building closer to the harbor. I initiated a total, irreversible severing of all contact with my parents and my sister. They ceased to exist in my reality, but I did not just walk away and forget. I took the profound, agonizing lessons I had learned in the dark of that rainy Seattle night and built something new. I utilized my decade of corporate risk assessment experience to establish a highly discreet, private consulting service. I now work specifically with professionals who find themselves trapped in the suffocating web of familial financial manipulation. I teach them how to identify the subtle signs of exploitation, how to build impenetrable financial firewalls, and most importantly, how to untangle the toxic guilt that keeps them bound to their abusers. I did not do this out of a desire for destructive revenge. Tearing my family down did not bring me joy, but I finally understood that true, lasting justice does not come from watching your abusers fall. The most beautiful, satisfying justice occurs when the person they only ever saw as a silent, obedient wallet finally stands up, takes back the pen, and writes her own name on her own terms. Thank you so much for listening to my story today, and I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.